The digital clock on the bedside table glowed 2 a.m. Charlotte's phone vibrated violently on the wooden nightstand beside her bed, shattering the silence of the dark room. Most people would have let the call roll into voicemail, or worse, turned their phone off before going to sleep. But Charlotte wasn't most people. She was the vice president of sales operations at Atlas Industrial Solutions, and for the 127 major manufacturing clients under her care, Charlotte was the only reason they slept peacefully at night. Half asleep, she reached for her phone. The name on the screen blinked urgently. Henderson Steel Plant, Pittsburgh. "Hello, Mr. Henderson," Charlotte said, her voice hoarse but steady. Her instincts were instantly awake. "Henderson. I'm sorry to call this late. This is an emergency." Panic bled through the line. In the background, the roar of factory machinery echoed loudly. "The solvent chemical shipment for the morning shift hasn't arrived. If that truck doesn't pass our gate before dawn, production stops completely. I'm losing tens of thousands of dollars every hour." Charlotte sat bolt upright, the blanket falling away. She didn't need her laptop. She knew the routes by heart. "Mark, take a breath," she said calmly. "Truck unit T45 got stuck on the interstate because of an accident around 11 p.m., but the driver, Dan Miller, took the arterial route about an hour ago. I know because he messaged me while grabbing coffee." Silence on the other end. "No need to panic," Charlotte continued, her tone honed by 15 years of crisis calls. "I'll call Dan now. I'll have him head straight to your plant, and I'll make sure he clears the gate before 3:30 a.m. Just have your unloading crew ready." A long exhale came through the phone. "Charlotte, I honestly don't know what I'd do if you weren't handling this," Henderson said, his voice shifting from panic to profound relief. "Thank you, and I'm sorry for waking you." "It's fine. That's my job. Go back to sleep. I'll monitor Dan." Click. The call ended. Charlotte didn't go back to bed. She called the truck driver, confirmed his position, then sent a follow-up message to Henderson. Only then did she lean back against the headboard. This was the reality no annual financial report ever recorded. To outsiders, or to data analysts staring at spreadsheets, Atlas Industrial Solutions looked like a phenomenal company, generating roughly $1 million a year almost automatically. They assumed the product was exceptional. In truth, Atlas sold commodities, industrial chemicals, lubricants, spare parts, everything that could be purchased from 10 other competitors, sometimes at lower prices. So why did clients stay? Why was revenue stable year after year? The answer was simple: because Charlotte answered the phone at 2 a.m. The next morning, Atlas headquarters buzzed like a beehive. Charlotte stepped inside wearing a sharp navy blazer. Her heels clicked confidently across the marble floor. She greeted the receptionist, the security guard, even the janitor, calling each by name. Not small talk, she genuinely knew them. "Charlotte!" Ryan Miller, a young sales executive, jogged toward her, pale and anxious. He held a tablet displaying a rejected contract draft. "The client in Seattle wants to cancel the renewal. They say our price is 3 cents higher per liter under the new agreement. Should we cut the price?" Charlotte stopped, still smiling, and took the tablet. "Who's the contact?" she asked. "David Brooks." She nodded. "Don't lower the price. Our margins are already thin." Ryan blinked. "Call David now. Ask him how his first grandchild is doing, the one born last month. Then remind him of last year when their warehouse flooded and Atlas was the only company willing to send emergency trucks on a Sunday to pump water out, for free." Ryan stared at her. "That's it?" "At this level, business isn't about 3 cents, Ryan," she said gently. "It's about who shows up when things go wrong. Tell David I send my congratulations and assure him his operations will never be late, not for a second, as long as I'm here." 30 minutes later, Ryan returned to her office beaming. "He signed a 2-year extension," Ryan said. "He even laughed when I asked about his grandchild." Charlotte winked over a stack of documents. "People buy from people," she said. "Never forget that." Inside her glass-walled office, Charlotte studied the whiteboard covered in quarterly targets. The number $1 million was written in bold red marker. To her, it wasn't money. It was thousands of promises kept, hundreds of problems solved, decades of trust woven thread by thread. The sales infrastructure at Atlas was her creation, her legacy. She built it from scratch, back when Atlas was a cramped office above a hardware store, long before it became a multi-story headquarters. She knew every weakness, every risk, every client's emotional pressure point. But that afternoon, a quiet wind of change began to blow. Whispers spread quickly in the break room. The old CEO was retiring. His replacement? A young outsider, foreign educated, former strategy consultant, the kind of man who worshipped efficiency above all else. His name was Nicholas Reed. Charlotte glanced at his LinkedIn profile on her phone. A stiff headshot, impeccable academic credentials, and a tagline that made her stomach tighten. Cutting costs, maximizing value through data-driven decisions. Data-driven, she murmured. Data couldn't record 2 a.m. calls. Data couldn't measure relief in a client's voice. And no matter how accurate it was, data had no heart. She locked her phone and went back to work, unaware that upstairs, her future was already being reduced to numbers by someone who had never shaken her hand. Monday morning felt different, not because the air conditioning was set too cold, but because of the new presence on the executive floor. Nicholas arrived without ceremony, no welcome speech, no ribbon cutting, no walkthrough to meet the staff. He went straight into the CEO's office, closed the thick glass door, and instructed his assistant not to disturb him unless the building was on fire. Inside his ivory tower, Nicholas didn't admire the city skyline. 3 massive monitors filled his vision, installed specially that morning. 5 years of financial statements, payroll data, operational costs, profit margins. To Nicholas, Atlas wasn't a company. It was a patient on the operating table, and he was the surgeon, scalpel in hand, searching for unnecessary fat to cut away. Meanwhile, Charlotte followed her usual routine, brewing coffee in the communal pantry. She had a private machine in her office, but she preferred the pantry. That's where real information surfaced. I heard Nicholas laid off 500 people at a textile company, Maya said, a sales admin, glancing around nervously. Charlotte laughed softly, stirring her coffee. Don't believe gossip, she said. He's here to grow Atlas, not play the Grim Reaper. Let's support him. I'll invite him to lunch later, get him to meet you all. She smiled. But somewhere deep inside, unease lingered. With her trademark optimism, Charlotte carried her coffee mug toward the CEO's office. She felt it was her responsibility to welcome him properly. After all, as someone who had held the company's revenue keys for years, she believed it was her duty to make Nicholas feel accepted. Knock, knock. Charlotte opened the door after a brief murmur from inside. Good morning, Nicholas, she said with the wide, disarming smile that had softened even the toughest clients. I'm Charlotte, VP of Sales. Welcome to Atlas. If you'd like a tour of the facilities or want to meet the core team, I'd be happy to walk you through. Or we could grab a coffee first. Nicholas didn't turn around. His fingers continued dancing across the keyboard, eyes locked onto a screen filled with red and green bar charts. 5 awkward seconds passed. Finally, Nicholas slowly rotated his chair. His face was blank. No smile. His gaze wasn't that of a colleague. It was the gaze of an auditor examining a suspicious line item. Charlotte, he said flatly, I'm reviewing the annual compensation report for the sales department. Her smile faded slightly, but she stayed professional. That's great, she replied. Our sales team performed exceptionally well. We exceeded targets by 12% this year. Nicholas ignored the mention of targets. Instead, he picked up a freshly printed sheet and placed it at the far edge of the desk, well out of Charlotte's reach. I've seen your salary and benefits, along with the monthly client entertainment expenses you approve.
These numbers are interesting. The word interesting sounded like a verdict. That's relationship investment, Charlotte explained, her discomfort growing. Manufacturing clients need personal attention, dinners, site visits, birthday gifts for plant managers. That's what keeps them loyal for decades. Nicholas scoffed quietly, as if she just told him a children's fairy tale. Loyalty is a myth. Clients stay for price and quality. Everything else is inefficiency. He turned back to a screen. Thank you for the offer, but I don't need coffee. What I need is a detailed report. Break down your daily activities and justify why your department's costs are so inflated. Put it on my desk tomorrow morning. He spun his chair back toward the monitors. Meeting over. Charlotte stood frozen for several seconds. Her blood surged. In 15 years at Atlas, no one had ever spoken to her like that. She wasn't an intern. She was the person who brought 7 figures into this company year after year. She turned and walked out, closing the door gently, too gently, a sign of restrained fury. As Charlotte walked back to her desk, the hallway felt colder than usual. Maya and the sales team, seeing her face, knew something bad had just happened. The Queen of Atlas had been rejected inside her own house. That night, long after the office had emptied, Nicholas was still there. He stared at a single highlighted row in his Excel file. Charlotte, VP Sales, total cost. On the monitor to his right, industry compensation benchmarks glowed brightly. His eyes darted back and forth. Charlotte's compensation sat 55% above market average. He muttered to himself in the darkened office. This company is insane, burning money on one person? To Nicholas, who had never walked factory floors, never inhaled industrial dust, never been called by a client at 2 a.m., those Excel numbers were absolute truth. He didn't see 15 years of experience. He didn't see client trust. He saw excess cost. He picked up a red marker and circled Charlotte's name on the printed report. His cost-cutting plan had found its primary target. What he didn't realize was that the red circle wouldn't just cut expenses, it would sever the company's lifeline. The main conference room at Atlas, its glass walls stretching from floor to ceiling, was usually Charlotte's favorite place. This was where major contracts were celebrated, where applause and laughter followed signatures. But today, Wednesday 10 a.m., the room felt like a military tribunal. 19 executives sat around the long oval table, the CFO, the COO, the head of HR. Everyone important was there, yet no one dared meet Charlotte's eyes. They stared at their shoes, pretended to review notes. The silence was suffocating. Even the projector's hum sounded like a jet engine. Nicholas stood at the head of the table. He didn't sit. He paced slowly, like a predator studying its pack. I've been here for 3 weeks. I found many great things at Atlas, but I've also discovered a cancer eating away at our profitability. Charlotte frowned. Cancer? A brutal word. Next slide. The projector flickered. A bar chart appeared, bold title across the top, Executive Cost Efficiency Analysis. Charlotte's heart stopped. Gray bars showed industry averages. One bar, bright red, towered far above the rest. Beneath it, unmistakably, Charlotte, VP Sales. Nicholas pointed at it with a laser pen. The red dot danced directly over her name. This, he said, his voice echoing in the silent room, without an ounce of guilt, the most brutal example of inefficiency I've ever seen. We are paying our VP of Sales 55% above market standard. Charlotte's face burned, as if she'd been slapped in public. She glanced around, hoping someone would defend her. The CFO, who knew exactly how hard she worked to generate the revenue that paid everyone's salaries, lowered his head. No one spoke. Nicholas, Charlotte tried to interject, her voice trembling with restrained anger. That data doesn't include contribution context. Data doesn't need context. Data is fact. He didn't let her finish. The fact is, this company is subsidizing an executive lifestyle that doesn't align with the job description. There are hundreds of sales professionals out there who could do the same job for half the cost. He clicked the remote and the slide changed. A massive figure appeared, minus 43%. For the long-term financial health of Atlas, management has decided to restructure executive compensation. Effective next month, the base salary and benefits of the VP of Sales position will be reduced by 43%. The room gasped. Some executives stared in disbelief. A pay cut of nearly half wasn't a correction, it was an insult, a quiet way of forcing someone out. We need to get lean to run faster. Meeting adjourned. He snapped his laptop shut and walked out without looking back. Charlotte remained seated, frozen. Her blood boiled, not because of the money, she had savings, but because of how it was done. She had been humiliated, stripped bare, reduced to a statistical anomaly in front of colleagues who had fought beside her for 15 years.
The CFO, Mr. Harrison, gently touched Charlotte's arm as everyone began to leave the room. "Try to be patient," he whispered. "Nicholas can be extreme." Charlotte brushed his hand aside lightly. She stood up and straightened her blazer, wrinkled from how tightly she'd been gripping it. Her eyes were dry, no tears. Grief had already passed. What remained was ash, hot, waiting to ignite. "He thinks he just cut costs," Charlotte murmured to herself, her gaze sharp as it pierced the glass door where Nicholas had disappeared. In reality, he just cut the throat of this company. She walked briskly out of the conference room. She had only one destination, the CEO's office. This wasn't over. The CEO's door was open before Nicholas could even respond. Charlotte entered without knocking. Her chest rose and fell as she restrained her emotions, but her face remained controlled. She closed the door behind her with enough force to make the glass tremble slightly. Nicholas, who had just settled back into his expensive ergonomic chair, looked unsurprised. He didn't even lift his eyes from his phone, as if he were checking Instagram notifications, not facing a senior executive whose reputation he'd just publicly dismantled. "Was something unclear about the presentation?" Nicholas asked casually, still staring at his screen. Charlotte stepped forward until both her hands pressed firmly against his desk. She leaned in, forcing him to look up. "That presentation wasn't about clarity," she said quietly, her voice heavy with pressure. "It was a public execution." She held his gaze. "You compared my salary to industry benchmarks without considering what I actually do. Do you think that 7-figure revenue just falls from the sky because we run Google ads?" Nicholas finally set his phone down. He leaned back, interlaced his fingers, and looked at her with bored indifference. "I know you work hard, Charlotte," he said dismissively. "Everyone here works hard. The problem is, you're paid as if you own the company." He tilted his head slightly. "I reviewed your expense reports, 5-star hotel dinners, custom holiday gift baskets, VIP golf tickets for clients." He paused. "That's waste. Inefficiency." "That's not waste, that's investment." Charlotte shot back instantly. "Those 127 manufacturing clients aren't robots, they're people. When their machines fail, they need someone they trust, not an automated response system." She took a breath. "Those entertainment costs are a fraction of a % of the contracts they sign." Nicholas let out a short, humorless laugh. He shook his head slowly, like a mentor correcting a stubborn intern. "You're stuck in the past, Charlotte. This is 2024. Business is about pricing algorithms, product quality, and efficient supply chains." He pointed at his monitor. "If our product is good and cheap, they'll buy, period.
The idea that we need expensive personal relationships to sell bolts and lubricants is outdated, romantic, but not scalable. You're wrong, Charlotte said, her breath controlled. In this industry, trust is the highest currency. Trust can be bought with volume discounts, Nicholas replied immediately. Silence fell. The tension between them was so thick, it felt as though the air itself had thinned. Nicholas stood, adjusted his jacket, and walked toward the window. He spoke with his back to Charlotte. Listen, I don't have time for philosophical debates. The decision is final. The board has approved it. He turned back to face her. You have two options. He held up one finger. First, you accept the 43% reduction. We eliminate unnecessary entertainment allowances, and you operate under standard KPIs. You remain VP, but at a reasonable cost. He paused deliberately. Or, Charlotte whispered, or you're free to find another company willing to pay you that much just to sip coffee and socialize with clients. The exit is right there. I'm sure plenty of fresh graduates would line up for your role at a quarter of the salary. Those words hit Charlotte harder than any chart in the boardroom. Sip coffee and socialize. 15 years of sweat, sleepless nights, crises, loyalty, reduced to a trivial social activity. She stared at Nicholas, searching for even a trace of respect or doubt. There was none. Only pure arrogance, the confidence of a man who believed data made him superior. Something inside Charlotte broke at that moment. Not her strength, her loyalty to Atlas Industrial Solutions. The emotional bond that had kept her standing through every corporate storm snapped instantly. Very well, Nicholas, Charlotte said quietly. Her face, moments ago flushed with anger, was now calm, terrifyingly calm. The decision is noted. Without waiting for a response, she turned and walked out. She didn't slam the door. She closed it gently, as if closing the final page of a book already finished. Nicholas scoffed, sat back down, and opened his laptop. Drama queen, he muttered. Certain she would return tomorrow, accept the pay cut, and fall in line because she needed the job. He had no idea. Charlotte had just made a decision that would bring his little kingdom crashing down. Charlotte didn't return to her office to cry. She returned to pack. Her keystrokes were rhythmic and firm as she typed her resignation letter. Short, direct, no flowery pleasantries, no flowery thank you for the opportunity. Just a formal notice, effective immediately. She was stepping down from her position. Print, sign, envelope. She pulled a foldable cardboard box from under her desk. It had been there for years, dusty, waiting. Only when she opened it did the reality finally hit. The glass-walled office felt foreign now. She picked up a framed photo from her desk. 5 years ago, the sales team celebrating their first 10 million milestone. Faces exhausted but happy, shiny with sweat after an all-night karaoke session. Charlotte smiled faintly and placed the photo in the box. Next came a scuffed white safety helmet, on its side written in permanent marker by a petrochemical plant manager in Texas. For Charlotte, our Iron Lady. That helmet wasn't a company asset, it was personal. Into the box it went. Thank you cards from clients, a coffee mug gifted by Mr. Henderson, a tacky keychain souvenir from a subordinate's vacation. One by one, 15 years of life moved from a mahogany desk into a cheap brown cardboard box. The desk slowly became empty, cold, lifeless, like a corpse. Ma'am? A suppressed sob came from the doorway. Maya, her trusted sales administrator, stood there with red, swollen eyes. Behind her, Ryan and several sales team members stood silently, unable to step inside. Charlotte exhaled slowly, then smiled reassuringly. She didn't want to look broken in front of her people. Hey, why are you all crying? She joked softly. It's not like someone died. Her voice was hoarse. Are you really leaving? Maya asked, her voice cracking. What are we supposed to do? Nicholas just raised our sales targets again. Charlotte walked over, placed a hand on Maya's shoulder, and pulled her into a brief hug. "You're a great team," she said gently. "You know how to sell. You know the product. You don't need me to keep moving forward." She was lying.
She knew they needed her. She knew Nicholas would eat them alive. But she couldn't say that. "Why didn't you fight back?" Ryan asked, frustrated. "You built this place. You are this place." Charlotte looked straight into Ryan's eyes. "Ryan," she said firmly, "listen to me. In your career, you can compromise on salary, on working hours, on perks." She paused. "But never, ever compromise on your dignity." The room fell silent. When the place you stand no longer respects your presence, it's no longer your workplace. It's just a location. Her words froze everyone in place. Charlotte returned to her desk and lifted the cardboard box, now heavy, not because of what it held, but because of the memories inside. She placed her company access card and office keys on the now empty desk. The resignation envelope went neatly beside them. She took a deep breath, absorbing the room's scent one last time. Paper, cold coffee, residual ambition. "All right," she murmured to herself. She stepped out. The walk from her office to the elevator felt endless. The office, usually loud and energetic, had gone eerily silent. Dozens of eyes followed her from behind cubicle walls. Shock, sadness, fear. They all knew what her departure meant. The protector on the top floor was gone. From behind the glass walls of his office, Nicholas Reed watched. He saw Charlotte walking through the floor with a box in her arms, passing rows of frozen employees. He took a sip of his espresso. The corner of his mouth lifted slightly. Done, he thought. Operating costs drop next month. Shareholders will be thrilled. He felt no loss. He felt victorious. To him, Charlotte was just an expensive component he had successfully removed and discarded. In the main lobby, Arthur, the senior security guard who had worked there since the building was first constructed, stared in shock at Charlotte carrying a box during office hours. "Miss Charlotte, where are you going with that box? Moving offices?" Charlotte stopped and smiled warmly at him. "Moving lives," she said softly. "Thank you for keeping me safe when I worked late all these years. Take care of your health, and don't forget your blood pressure medication." Arthur stood there stunned, still processing her words as Charlotte walked through the automatic doors. The hot city air hit her face immediately. Traffic horns blared, dust filled the air. Yet for Charlotte, it was the freshest air she had breathed in 15 years. She didn't look back. She didn't glance at the towering glass building of Atlas Industrial Solutions behind her. She flagged down a taxi, placed the box in the back seat, and got in. Inside the cab, Charlotte checked her phone. One new message. Not from Nicholas. Of course not. It was from HR at Apex Industrial Group, Atlas's largest competitor. "We've heard the news, Miss Charlotte. When can we talk?" Charlotte smiled. The single tear she'd been holding back finally fell, but she wiped it away immediately. The game had just begun. The Apex Industrial Group headquarters was only a few miles from Atlas, but it felt like a different planet. If Atlas was cold, modern glass and steel, Apex felt warm and timeless. Thick carpets, abstract paintings on the walls, and most importantly, people smiled. Charlotte sat in the executive waiting lounge. She wore her best suit, yet her palms were slightly sweaty. The trauma from her last meeting with Nicholas still lingered. In her mind, she rehearsed her defense, why her salary was high,
why her operating costs were large, why she was worth every dollar. She was mid-argument in her head when the door opened. It wasn't a secretary. It was Samuel Wright, CEO of Apex Industrial Group. The 60-year-old silver-haired man walked toward her with open arms. "Charlotte, finally," Samuel said warmly, his baritone voice filling the room. "Welcome to Apex." Charlotte froze for a second, then shook his hand. His grip was firm, warm. "Thank you, Mr. Wright. I'm sorry to come on such short notice." "Short notice?" Samuel laughed. "We're the lucky ones." He gestured her inside. "Come in. Coffee's ready. Black, no sugar, right? My sales team told me. They lost enough bids to you to remember your taste." Charlotte smiled. That tiny detail alone showed a level of attention Nicholas never had. They sat on leather sofas, not across a desk divided by hierarchy. "Let's get straight to it," Samuel said, handing her a black leather folder. "I've heard what happened at Atlas. I won't ask for details. That's their kitchen, not mine. All I know is this." He looked at her steadily. They just let go of their greatest asset. Charlotte opened her mouth to begin her prepared defense. "Sir, about my salary at Atlas, I know the numbers were above industry average, but I can explain." Samuel raised a hand gently. "Charlotte, stop," he said kindly. "You don't need to explain the cost of a fuel for a Ferrari. If I want a Ferrari, I know it's expensive, drinks fuel, and requires care, but it runs fast." He smiled. "If I can't afford it, I buy a family sedan." Charlotte fell silent. The analogy was simple and devastatingly accurate. "At Apex," Samuel continued, pointing to the folder, "we're not looking for discounts. We're looking for winners." Charlotte opened the folder, her heart pounding. Inside was a draft employment contract. Her eyes immediately went to the compensation page. She caught her breath. Apex wasn't just matching her salary at Atlas. They were increasing it by 15%. Below it, a special clause stood out. Strategic Client Entertainment Fund, full authority granted to VP of Sales. No cuts, no benchmarking debates, no humiliation. "We know how you work, Charlotte," Samuel said seriously. "You don't sell products, you sell trust, and trust requires capital. We'll provide the capital, you pull the strings." Charlotte's eyes burned. After being treated like a parasite by Nicholas, this recognition felt like cold water in a desert. It wasn't relief over money, it was validation. That 15 years hadn't been wasted, that she wasn't crazy, that she was valuable. "Mr. Wright," Charlotte said verbally, "are you sure you're ready for the weight I bring? My methods, my intensity." Samuel chuckled. "Your methods are what gave us nightmares trying to beat Atlas. Now I want those nightmares transferred to our competitors." Charlotte closed the folder slowly. She looked at Samuel and nodded firmly. "Where's the pen?" At that moment, Charlotte was no longer a humiliated executive or a wounded employee. She was a queen again. This time with a king who supported her, not one who tried to behead her. After the signatures were signed, Samuel shook her hand once more. "When can you start?" "Tomorrow," Charlotte answered without hesitation. "Excellent. Your office will be next to mine." He lowered his voice slightly, eyes gleaming with humor. "I hear many Atlas clients are very close to you. Don't hesitate to say hello." Charlotte smiled, a quiet, dangerous smile. "Don't worry," she said. "I was planning to." She walked out of the Apex building with light steps. For the first time in a long while, she felt alive again. She pulled out her phone and opened her contact list. There were 127 names she needed to reach. She wouldn't poach them aggressively. She would simply let them know that she had moved houses. And in this business, guests always follow where the good host lives. That afternoon, the sky over the city was clear. The storm inside Charlotte had passed. But the real storm for Atlas Industrial Solutions was only beginning. Charlotte's first 3 days at Apex Industrial Group were calm. No shouting, no drama. She sat in her new office, sipped her black coffee, and did what she did best, building relationships. There was no grand campaign, no mass announcements. She sent short messages to a handful of VIP contacts. Good morning. Just a quick note. I'm no longer with Atlas. I'm now at Apex Industrial Group. Same number if you need anything. Best regards to the family. Simple. But the effect was like dropping a lit match into a pool of gasoline. Meanwhile, back at Atlas Industrial Solutions, Nicholas Reed was enjoying what he believed was a victory. He sat in the conference room with the HR team, admiring the projected payroll savings for the next quarter. "Look at this," Nicholas said, pointing at the chart. "With Charlotte's salary gone and entertainment costs cut, our operating margin jumps by 4%. This is what I call smart management." The sentence had barely ended when the conference room door swang open without a knock. Ryan, one of the senior sales executives, walked in pale as a ghost. His hand shook as he held a fax printout and his phone. "Mr. Reed," his voice cracked. "I'm in a meeting," Nicholas snapped. "Mr. Handoko from Chikarang Steel just sent a contract cancellation." "Cancellation? That contract still has 8 months left. We have penalty clauses. Tell him he'll lose a fortune." "He already paid the penalty this morning," Ryan said quietly. "He said he's more afraid of his factory shutting down because there's no one he trusts to handle emergency shipments, except Charlotte." Silence. Before Nicholas could respond, the phone on the table buzzed again. This time, it's from Sinar Jaya Manufacturing Group. They've canceled tomorrow's tender meeting. They've appointed Apex Industrial Group as their sole supplier. "Apex?" Nicholas stood up. "Why all of a sudden?" "They said because Charlotte is there now." Within the next hour, Atlas Industrial Solutions descended into chaos. Phones rang across the sales floor like a symphony of panic. One by one, Atlas's biggest clients delivered the same message. Within 72 hours of Charlotte officially joining Apex, 9 key clients, nearly 30% of Atlas's total revenue, walked away. Nicholas panicked. He ordered the sales team to call everyone back. "Offer them another 10%, 15% if needed," he shouted in the hallway. "Show them we're cheaper than Apex." Ryan returned to his desk with slumped shoulders. "It didn't work, sir. I just spoke with the operations manager at Perkasa Industries. He said, I can buy oil from anyone, but I only buy from someone who knows my machines break down on Sundays. Charlotte knew that. You didn't. They rejected the discount." Nicholas's data-driven logic began to collapse. How could rational business people reject massive discounts just because one person changed companies? It made no sense. There was nothing about this in the management textbooks he worshipped. That night, Atlas Industrial Solutions, usually dark by evening, remained brightly lit. Nicholas sat alone at his massive desk. The screen still showed charts of cost savings. Now they felt like mockery. He had saved billions by cutting Charlotte's compensation and lost tens of billions in revenue within 3 days. He picked up his phone and searched for Charlotte's name. He wanted to rage, to accuse her of stealing clients. But he stopped. She hadn't taken documents. She hadn't taken databases. She had taken herself. And to those clients, Atlas was Charlotte. Across town in a quiet restaurant, Charlotte was having dinner with 3 factory owners. They laughed, talked about grandchildren and golf. They never once discussed Apex's pricing. For them, The contracts were already decided. Where Charlotte went, their trust followed. The 72-hour shock was only the beginning. Cracks had spread through Atlas's foundation, and Nicholas had just realized he had no cement left to fix them. By the second week without Charlotte, Atlas Industrial Solutions was no longer a company. It was a leaking ship in the middle of a storm. Nicholas tried to regain control. He gathered the remaining sales team in the conference room. His face was drawn, eyes blood-red from sleepless nights, but his arrogance hadn't quite died. "Listen to me," Nicholas slammed the table. "Losing 9 clients is just psychological shock. They're emotional. Your job is to bring them back with logic. Offer Loyalty Plus packages, extend payment terms to 90 days. We have inventory, we have logistics. Do not let Apex win." What Nicholas didn't understand was the domino effect of the manufacturing industry. Factory owners talk at golf clubs, in association WhatsApp groups, at private dinners. The message was always the same. Atlas isn't the same without Charlotte. Soon, mid-tier clients who had hesitated began to waver. "Mr. Reed," Ryan reported flatly, numb to bad news by now, "Astra Components has suspended all orders for next quarter." "Why?" Nicholas barked. "We gave them 20% discount." "Yesterday's shipment was 6 hours late. When they called logistics, our team told them to reread the contract clause on delivery tolerance." Ryan hesitated. "They said if Charlotte were still here, she'd call the truck driver herself or secure backup transport within 10 minutes. She never argued contract clauses while our production line was dead." Nicholas sank back into his chair. Only now did he understand. The rigid system he'd been so proud of was brittle. Charlotte had been the lubricant that kept Atlas's rusted gears turning. Without her, every small friction became a fire that burned client relationships. At Apex Industrial Group, Charlotte worked at a completely different pace. She wasn't chasing new clients. She was calming former Atlas clients flooding into her office. "One at a time, Mr. Harris," she laughed softly over the phone. "I'll make sure the transition doesn't disrupt your stock. My team has prepared a dedicated warehouse for your plant." Samuel Wright, CEO of Apex, often stood quietly at her doorway, watching. Charlotte didn't just sell products. She managed client anxiety. She provided a sense of security no discount could ever buy. "Incredible," Samuel mumbled to himself. "She's not just a VP of sales. She's a walking insurance policy for her clients." Back at Atlas Industrial Solutions, the situation grew darker by the day. Losing 41% of revenue in a single quarter was no longer just a figure on a report. It had become a black hole, sucking the company's liquidity dry. Raw material suppliers began hearing rumors of trouble. Afraid Atlas wouldn't be able to pay, they started demanding advance payments. It strangled Atlas's already fragile cash flow. The breaking point came when a leading industry magazine released its cover story. "A leadership crisis at Atlas. Is one person really worth billions?" The article dissected, with brutal clarity, how Nicholas Reed's decision to cut Charlotte's compensation triggered a mass client exodus. Nicholas's reputation as an efficiency genius collapsed overnight. Within the industry, he was now known as the CEO who burned down the house just to save money on the fire extinguisher. Nicholas sat alone in his dark office, staring at the article. For the first time, genuine fear wrapped around him. Through the glass wall, he looked down at the office floor, now dotted with empty desks, as sales staff resigned one by one, following Charlotte to Apex Industrial Group. The final domino hadn't fallen yet, but Nicholas could already see the direction. "This can't be because of just one person," he whispered to himself, still clinging to denial. He failed to realize that in a business built on trust, the right person is everything. The first quarterly closing report under Nicholas's leadership landed on his desk with a heavy thud. The cover was pristine white. The contents were a horror story. Nicholas stared at the numbers until his eyes burned. Revenue down 41%. This wasn't a dip. It was hemorrhaging. "How is this possible?" Nicholas snapped. "We cut operating costs by 22%. Salaries, benefits, travel, everything." Mr. Harrison, the usually reserved CFO, finally snapped. He removed his glasses and fixed Nicholas with a cold stare he had never shown before. "Mr. Reed," he said quietly but sharply, "you cut $2 million in costs and destroyed $6 million in revenue. That's not efficiency, that's suicide." Mr. Harrison slid another report across the table. "This is from accounts receivable. Since our major clients moved to Apex, they're withholding final payments under the pretext of quality audits. Our cash flow is completely frozen. We don't have enough liquidity to pay raw material vendors next month." The room suddenly felt smaller. "We'll take a short-term loan," Nicholas said weakly. "The banks have already seen these numbers," Mr. Harrison cut in. "Our credit rating has been downgraded. They won't risk lending to a company that lost nearly half its clients in 3 months." The bad news spread through Atlas like a contagion, in the cafeteria, in the parking garage, in employee WhatsApp groups. The atmosphere was suffocating. No jokes, only whispers about who would be laid off next. The psychological weight of the numbers crushed what little morale remained. Logistics staff worked carelessly, knowing overtime would never be paid. Administrative teams made data entry mistakes while secretly scanning LinkedIn for job openings. On the sales floor, Ryan stared at his silent phone. No more calls from Mr. Handoko, no more from Mr. Booty. Only complaints from small clients who felt abandoned. "This place feels like a graveyard," Ryan murmured to Maya. Across the city, Charlotte stood before a massive screen in Apex's main conference room. The charts were the inverse of Atlas's. A green line surged sharply upward. Samuel Wright entered, holding a bottle of champagne, even though it was still office hours. "Take a look," he said proudly. "Our production capacity is fully booked through the end of next year. I just spoke with the board. They've approved fast-tracking the new warehouse in Cikarang." Charlotte smiled, but there was bitterness behind it. She had heard the news about Atlas. She knew her former colleagues were living in fear of tomorrow. She had never wanted Atlas to collapse. She had only wanted respect. "Mr. Wright," Charlotte said carefully, "may I ask one thing?" "Anything," Samuel replied warmly. "You're our hero." "If Atlas starts layoffs," Charlotte continued, "please prioritize my former sales and admin teams. Bring them here if possible. They're excellent people who were trapped under the wrong leadership." Samuel studied her for a long moment, then nodded in admiration. "Even after they pushed you out, you're still thinking about them." "All right, send me the names." That night, Nicholas Reed became the last person to leave the building. On his way to the elevator, he passed Charlotte's old desk, now occupied by a young manager he had hired at standard market pay. The desk was chaotic. The new manager didn't know how to handle angry clients. Left behind on the desk was a handwritten note from a client who had just terminated their contract. "You still have the products, but you've lost the soul." Nicholas stepped into the elevator and pressed the lobby button. As the doors closed, his reflection stared back at him in the mirror. A man who knew the price of everything and the value of nothing. The red numbers on his reports were no longer financial data. They were the price of a woman's dignity, Charlotte's, that he had crushed. And now he was paying for it with the collapse of his own empire. That night, Atlas felt quieter than a cemetery. Nicholas sat in his executive chair, lights off. Only the blue glow of his laptop illuminated a face that looked 10 years older. The board had just issued an ultimatum: Fix this in 30 days or leave without severance. Nicholas picked up his phone. For an hour, he stared at a single name in his contacts: Charlotte, EVP Sales. His pride battled violently with his fear of failure. He hated the reality that he had to swallow the words he had once spat with arrogance. With a slightly trembling hand, he pressed call. 1 ring, 2, 3. Each second felt like torture. He prepared everything: a professional apology, a higher salary offer, full autonomy over all major clients. Hello? The voice was calm, steady, and most painfully for Nicholas, it sounded happy. There was no anger, no bitterness, only composed maturity. Charlotte, this is Nicholas, he cleared his throat, trying to reclaim authority. Oh, Mr. Reed, how can I help you? Charlotte, I want to talk about Atlas, Nicholas said carefully. I think we both know the situation isn't ideal. I've reviewed the company structure again, and I admit some decisions may have been rushed. He paused, waiting for interruption. Silence. I want you back, Nicholas said quickly, afraid to lose momentum. I'm offering your previous position, same salary, plus a 20% performance bonus. No more entertainment budget cuts. Full control over all major clients. I'll announce this as a strategic rehiring in front of the entire executive board. The lines stayed quiet.
Nicholas Reed held his breath. This was the best offer he could possibly make. He was certain Charlotte would at least consider it. Who could refuse a higher salary in public recognition like that? A long exhale came from the other end of the line. Mr. Reed, Charlotte said softly, you still don't understand, do you? What do you mean? Nicholas asked. You're calling me because your financial reports are bleeding red, not because you realized, on a human level, that you were wrong. You're offering money because you believe money is the only reason I work. She paused, then continued in a tone that sent a chill down Nicholas's spine. When you humiliated me in front of 19 executives, you didn't just cut my salary, you cut my respect for a company I helped build for 15 years. You proved that in your eyes, dedication has no value if it can't be plugged into an Excel formula. Charlotte, come on, that was business, Nicholas interrupted, panic leaking into his voice. Yes, she replied evenly, this is business, and in my business now, I have partners at Apex Industrial Group who understand that I'm not a cost, I'm an asset. Samuel Wright didn't need to wait for revenue to collapse by 41% before learning how to value me. I'm rejecting your offer not because the money isn't enough, but because I can't work for a leader who only sees someone's worth after they're gone. Charlotte, please, Nicholas's voice cracked, nearly a whimper. Atlas will collapse if you don't help explain things to the clients. I'm sorry, Mr. Reed, she said gently. I have to end this call. I'm having dinner with Mr. Handoko and his family. We're celebrating his new grandchild. Good night. Click. The line went dead. Nicholas slowly lowered the phone from his ear. The flat, monotonous dial tone sounded like the final heartbeats of Atlas Industrial Solutions. He leaned forward, resting his head on the desk, eyes closed in darkness. Only then did the bitter truth fully settle in. Money can buy someone's time. It can never buy back trust once it's been betrayed. Outside, the lights of the Atlas building shut off one by one as employees went home. Hope already gone. Tomorrow morning, Nicholas would face reality alone, standing at the peak of a mountain already sliding beneath his feet. That morning, the executive floor smelled nothing like coffee. It smelled like fear. Nicholas stood behind his office window, staring down at 2 massive trucks in the parking lot. They weren't delivery trucks. They were repossession trucks,
loading seized factory equipment after Atlas defaulted on its payments. Atlas was no longer just losing money, it was dying. At 9 o'clock, Nicholas walked into the multi-purpose hall. No grand slides, no efficiency charts, only a long list of names trembling in his hand. Before hundreds of pale-faced employees, Nicholas stood with slumped shoulders. The arrogant executive who once belittled Charlotte behind glass walls was gone. With heavy breath, his voice shaking, he spoke. To survive, the company must take its final measure. Effective today, we will reduce our workforce by 60%. Crying erupted instantly. Maya, the sales admin who had hung on until the end, collapsed into her chair. Ryan stared blankly at the ceiling. Factory workers who had given decades of their lives shouted in fury. "This is your fault, Nicholas. All of this happened because you drove Charlotte away." Nicholas didn't argue. He couldn't. He lowered his head as his employees filed past the HR desk, collecting brown envelopes that might not even be redeemable because the company's cash was already gone. An hour later, Nicholas returned to his office. Mr. Harrison, the CFO, was waiting. "Is it done?" Harrison asked coldly. "Our primary investors have withdrawn. They've agreed to sell Atlas's remaining assets to a consolidation firm." "For how much?" Nicholas asked weakly. Harrison named a number. Nicholas closed his eyes. It was humiliating. A company once valued in hundreds of millions, stable, respected, was now being sold at liquidation prices. This wasn't a partnership. It was a corpse rescue. "One condition," Harrison added. "What?" "You must step down as CEO immediately after the acquisition is signed. They want Atlas's name cleansed of your leadership style." Nicholas laughed bitterly, a sound closer to sobbing. He had destroyed the company, trying to look smart in front of numbers, and now those same numbers were throwing him out onto the street. Outside the building, the scene was devastating. Employees carried boxes, just like Charlotte had months ago, but unlike them, they left with uncertainty, not opportunity. Suddenly, a large tour bus stopped in front of Atlas's gate. The doors opened. Charlotte stepped down. She wasn't there to gloat. Her face was filled with compassion. Behind her, Apex Industrial Group's HR team unloaded folding tables and forms. "Everyone," Charlotte called. Her familiar voice made heads turn. "I've spoken with Mr. Wright. Apex is expanding rapidly due to new contracts. We need experienced salespeople, administrators, and factory operators, especially those who know Atlas inside and out." A miracle unfolded. Grief turned into hope. One by one, former Atlas employees lined up in front of Charlotte. She shook their hands, remembered their names, restored a sense of dignity that had long vanished from that building. From his high office window, Nicholas watched. He saw the woman he once labeled an excessive cost become the only lifeboat for the people he abandoned. Slowly, Nicholas removed his CEO ID card and placed it on the dusty desk. He finally understood one thing. He may have had the title, but Charlotte had the people. And in industry, people are the only thing that's real. Atlas had sunk, and Nicholas was the captain left alone on a ship destroyed by his own arrogance. 2 years passed. The Atlas Industrial Solutions sign was removed from headquarters. A building now bore the logo of a satellite branch of Apex Industrial Group, still expanding. In a grand lecture hall in Cambridge, Massachusetts, silence fell. On a massive projector screen appeared side-by-side photos of Charlotte and Nicholas. Below them, a bold title, "The Human Capital Paradox: The Fall of Atlas." A renowned management professor walked slowly before graduate students. "This story," the professor began, is not merely about financial failure. It is a case study in the fatal misunderstanding of what an asset truly is. The CEO in this case, Nicholas Reed, made a mistake common among leaders obsessed with short-term efficiency. He confused price with value. Students took furious notes as the professor broke down how a 43% salary cut triggered a collapse in company valuation worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Nicholas saw Charlotte's compensation as an operational expense. In reality, it was an insurance premium, protecting $15 million in annual revenue. He cut the brake cable to reduce the car's weight, then acted shocked when it drove straight off a cliff.
Meanwhile, at the newly established headquarters of Apex Industrial Group in New York, the atmosphere was far removed from rigid corporate formalities. Charlotte sat in her spacious office, the door always open. She had just ended a phone call with Samuel Wright, now a grandfather to 3 grandchildren. Their contract with Apex had just been renewed for another 5 years, without a single argument over pricing. Ryan entered the room carrying a tablet. He now served as senior sales manager. "The quarterly report is out," he said. "We recorded another 25% growth. The team we recruited from Atlas Industrial Solutions has become our top performers." Charlotte smiled as she took a sip of her coffee. "Good work, Ryan. Make sure they all receive proper bonuses. No one should ever feel they have to work through dawn without being valued." Ryan laughed. "Absolutely. Everyone here knows they're more than just numbers in a spreadsheet." Elsewhere, in a small cafe on the outskirts of the city, a man sat alone with an aging laptop. Nicholas Reed no longer wore the tailored suits of Atlas Industrial Solutions. He now worked as a small independent consultant, helping local businesses organize their financial records. In the corporate world, his name was permanently stained. Whenever someone searched him on Google, articles about the Atlas blunder dominated the results. Nicholas opened a digital business journal. His eyes stopped at an article titled, "The Importance of Personal Relationships in Industrial Business, Lessons from Charlotte." He read it line by line. The sting in his chest was still there, but now it mixed with understanding, arriving far too late. He remembered Charlotte's words, "People buy from people." Nicholas closed his laptop and stared out the window. He noticed a delivery courier chatting warmly with the cafe owner, laughing together before exchanging a package. A small transaction, but built on trust, something he had once dismissed as worthless simply because it couldn't be calculated with formulas. The story of Charlotte and Nicholas became immortalized in global business literature, not as a tale of revenge, but as a stark warning to future leaders. A company is nothing more than bricks and cables if there are no people inside who trust one another. Charlotte proved that dignity and personal relationships are the strongest foundations in business. Atlas Industrial Solutions became a tombstone, a warning to those who try to build success while ignoring humanity. At Apex, Charlotte stood by the window watching the sunset. She was no longer known as someone from a failed company. She had become a new standard for how leadership should be practiced. The story of Atlas had ended, but the lesson of Charlotte had only just begun for the world. Lessons from the story. This story is not merely workplace drama. It is a metaphor for the collision between numerical logic and human psychology. Number 1, price is not the same as value. The greatest lesson for leaders is understanding the difference between cost and contribution. Nicholas saw Charlotte's salary as a burden on the balance sheet. In reality, it was an investment that secured $15 million in revenue. Lesson: never cut costs before truly understanding the value they generate. Number 2, business is about people, not just data.
Nicholas was an extreme data-driven leader. He forgot that behind every multi-million-dollar contract is a human decision. Clients aren't loyal to logos. They're loyal to people who solve their problems at dawn. Lesson: data tells you what happened. Empathy tells you why. Number 3, trust is the highest currency. In high-risk manufacturing industries, trust is far more valuable than price discounts. Charlotte spent 15 years building it. Nicholas destroyed it in 15 minutes during a presentation. Lesson: once trust fractures, no discount or salary increase can repair it quickly. Number 4, how you let someone go defines your future. Nicholas didn't just cut Charlotte's salary, he humiliated her publicly. That act created a powerful adversary. Had he handled the transition with dignity, Charlotte might not have taken every client with her. Lesson for professionals: always preserve dignity, even when parting ways. The business world is small. Number 5, never ignore tacit knowledge. Nicholas assumed Charlotte's role could be replaced by a low-paid graduate. He overlooked her understanding of client behavior, logistics complexities, and crisis management, knowledge never written in manuals, but vital for survival. Lesson: seniority is not about time served, but depth of experience in managing unseen risks. Number 6, self-worth is not negotiable. For professionals like Charlotte, work is not just survival, it is honor. When Nicholas attacked her dignity, she proved that true professionals never lack opportunities. Lesson for professionals: self-worth matters more than titles.